Today on With the First Pick, we'll take a look back at the national championship game and talk draft prospects for both Notre Dame and those new national champs, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Like I mentioned last week, the old With the First Pick RV is hitting the road. We'll be in Dallas at the Shrine Bowl starting tomorrow, and then down in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl next week. So it only makes sense, of course, to give you some names to watch. We'll even throw in some draft ranges and maybe even some draft comps. These are the guys you can expect to gain some draft buzz momentum, spelled with a lot of Z's over the next 3 months or so. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's Josh Edwards. This is episode 214. Josh is dutifully filling in for Rick, who continues to try to save the Jets. I don't know if they're going to hire anyone or not, but they're getting their money's worth out of Rick. Josh, Debo sent me a tweet that someone sent out that basically Rick talked to 50 guys, only to end up hiring the two guys he talked to last year during the Washington Commanders. Aaron Glenn looks to be the potential head coach. It hasn't been announced yet. I don't know if it has as we talk. And then Lance Newmark, I believe, who was from Detroit, went to Washington, has an opportunity, according to reports, not from Rick. I just see this on the internet. So I think JJ reported it to be the next GM. So Rick wheeling and dealing, getting paid. I hear you, Rick. All right, we've got 92 days until the actual draft. Rick won't be at the Shrine Bowl, but he will join us at the Senior Bowl. He told me last night that he will be there with bells on, so make of that what you will. Josh, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. This Jet search has extended for so long that I was kind of wondering if at some point you were going to get an interview, but instead you're here talking with me about the players that will be appearing in the Shrine and Senior Bowls over the next couple of weeks.
Rick told me that I was too flip-floppy to be a GM, so that ruined my chances at a whatever. Whatever, Rick, like you know anything about being a general manager. All right, let's start with the old championship game, which looked like it was going to be a blowout for a second. You're an Ohio guy. Are you an Ohio State fan?
No, did not grow up an Ohio State fan. I do have a lot of family that was texting me during the game about some things that were going on. So that is a part of my blood, so to speak, but did not personally grow up an Ohio State fan.
What's your fandom allegiance?
Kentucky mostly.
Okay, all right. That makes sense.
I've got family from Kentucky too, so kind of split between. Just steered more towards that way. Maybe I should have split it down the middle a little bit. Might have been a little bit more fun over the years.
Yeah, that checks out. You're a Browns fan, so why would you not choose Ohio State and go with Kentucky? Yeah. So, are you a Harlem Globetrotters basketball fan too? Is that how that works? Or the Washington Generals? You might be Washington Generals.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I feel like I'm stuck rooting with the team that's destined to lose. So I guess I have to be a Generals fan.
Like I told I grew up in North Carolina. I was a UNC fan. You can see that over there. But like I told my sister who went to UNC and married a guy. Actually, I love my brother-in-law, Trip. He went to NC State. But I say this to her, and I said it to you before, and I repeat it. Don't raise your son a Browns fan. Just do him a favor. give him a chance.
Hey, they're gonna have it's their own discretion. Whatever they choose to do, I will fully support it.
Life is tough enough. You don't have to put them behind the eight ball with their fandom.
You know what? I've found myself personally pulling back a little bit in fandom since I've joined the industry. Part of that could be due to the struggles of that organization, but I've tried to view it from a little bit less of a biased lens through the years. So maybe they'll catch that honestly as well.
Yeah, we shall see. Fingers crossed. As Mike Tyson once famously said, hope is not a plan. I don't know if he said that or not, but I love that saying. All right, let's talk about some of the biggest risers from that college football championship game. Let me talk about some fallers too. I don't think there were actually a lot of fallers. I'll say quickly about a faller. Maybe Howard crossed the third, but he's been banged up. He's played a lot. I think he's year 6 now. I was a huge fan of his last year. I like the way he plays when he's healthy. He's undersized. He's an interior defensive lineman. So I don't know if that game necessarily hurt his stock. I don't think he played particularly poorly, but he's going to have to come on here at the All-Star games to sort of get his name back out there, maybe test well at the combine. But I think there are a lot of risers, and we'll talk about these quarterbacks a little more in depth in a second. But I thought Riley Leonard played his best game, and I thought Will Howard played one of his best games. The Indiana game was really good for Will Howard as well. The thing with Riley Leonard, watching it live, it's like, oh, okay, he's throwing on time. He's pushing the ball down the field. I went back and watched all his throws yesterday morning. So he's okay. Still doesn't have a good arm. Still misses some throws. If he can't set his feet, he's not going to throw accurately, and he's a runner. was talking to our buddy Pete Prisco yesterday. I said, he's, best case Taysom Hill. He goes, he's not even Taysom Hill athletically. I was like, I don't know. We'll see. Look, he's not as thick or probably as fast as Taysom Hill was coming out, but I just don't know if he's a quarterback. I have like a midday 3 grade on him, but that feels high. But maybe if he goes to the Senior Bowl and balls out, we'll reevaluate. So let's start with Riley Leonard. What do you think? I think he helped himself, but I don't know how much.
Yeah, it's kind of disappointing. I mean, that was your guy, first of all, coming into the year.
It really
I mean,
was. I forgot
once he
about it.
transferred from Duke. Honestly, I thought he showed more as a passer when he was at Duke. I thought there was something there that could be developed once he got to Notre Dame, but obviously he leaned more into the running aspect of his athleticism, his skill set this year, which is great. I mean, it helps kind of show more of what his athleticism could be, but I don't think that he helped himself in terms of the overall perspective of what he could be as a prospect. So I agree with you. He's probably in that mid day 3 type area at this point. I wish he had shown more as a passer, but he's somebody that has the athleticism that's probably at least going to get a look at the next level and potentially have a chance to stick on a roster.
So my comp for him, and this is a loose one, and Rick's not here to hate the comp, but it's a tough comp because there aren't a lot of guys that play like he does. But I get Des Ritter vibes in terms of he's a little better athlete, but Des is a pretty good athlete. I think he ran the 4.6s, and Des struggled with accuracy, and that's part of the reason he didn't last in Atlanta, and he didn't have a chance with the Raiders this fall, so I'm not going to hold that against him. But I don't know if there's a good comp for him in terms of what that translates like at the next level and in terms of having success, because I don't think there are a lot of guys that don't have very strong arms, that don't throw accurately, that don't play on time, that have success in the NFL. But again, like I said, we got 92 days to figure this out. I thought he played well, though. I give him credit, and he brought that team back. And I give Marcus Freeman's crew some props for not folding it up when it looked like that game was a wrap. Ryan Day, I think, aged about 50 years in the middle of that third quarter.
Yeah, when you want to talk about narratives, there might not have been a coach in college football that needed that victory more than Ryan Day. He's kind of taken a lot of hits over the past couple of years in terms of his ability to not get over the hump, so to speak. So for him to finally do that, he probably changed a lot of narratives moving forward. And they had a pretty difficult path. I think I saw they played every team in the top 8 with the exception of Georgia to get where they did. So ultimately, it was a good season for the Buckeyes. Hat tip to Ryan Day, and I think he bought himself a few years of not being on the hot seat.
Well, at least one. That's how fickle the fan base is. It's funny. I was thinking during their run before the championship game that Ohio State fans have to love him even though they want to hate him, and they're going to complain that he won the national title, and that'll be whatever happens in the next few years. But that's how fandom works. That's how Steelers fans are.
I haven't noticed.
I know who want to run Mike Tomlin out of town. Mike Tomlin wouldn't get 2 feet out the door at the facility before he was hired again if they ran him out of town. But, people know better than me. All right. A couple other names. We'll talk about Will Howard in a second. I don't want to lump him here, and then I got him later here on the rundown. But I'll mention some names, and you can take this in any direction you want of guys who I thought helped themselves. Emeka Egbuka showed some juice. He had that fumble. That stinks. But I thought in terms of showcasing his ability, in terms of yards after the catch and ability to catch the ball in traffic, Jack Sawyer went nuts in the last game, in the semifinal game. I went back and watched a few of his snaps. He's got some juice. JT Tuimoloau obviously can get after. I think Jack Sawyer's probably a little better right now. Donovan Jackson, who I think you had in your latest mock draft, the guard who was forced to move to left tackle, I think at the Penn State game. He's a earth mover. He's a really good football player. And in case you don't know, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau are edge rushers, and they are both 260 plus. On the other side, we talked about Riley Leonard. Xavier Watts, the safety I love for Notre Dame. I think he's a day 2 guy. We'll see how fast he runs. He's going to be at the Senior Bowl. And then Jordan Clark, Ryan Clark's son, Arizona State transfer, will be at the Shrine Bowl. He plays a lot like his dad. He may not run a 4.4. He may, but if he doesn't, I won't be surprised. But he'll pop you in the mouth, and he plays most effectively, I think, closer to the line of scrimmage, but he can cover guys downfield. Anyway, those are some guys that I think over the course of the playoffs have helped their draft stock, some more than others, some guys we knew about, and some guys that are sort of getting on our radar here. Got any thoughts about any of those guys or anyone else you want to add?
Yeah, I'll mention a few before I get to the one that I ultimately wanted to discuss. And I think Egbuka, just looking at what he has accomplished over the course of his career at Ohio State, he stacks up very high. I think he leads a lot of receiving categories at Ohio State, which is impressive considering everybody that he's played with. He's played with Garrett Wilson. He's played with Chris Olave. He's played with Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith and Jigba. I mean, they've had so many wide receivers come through that program, and yet he ranks at or near the top of almost every category. So I think seeing that stat alone has to do a little bit of something for the narrative, because I think to this point, everybody views him as a complementary piece, which he is, but he's almost become an afterthought in this process, and he's still a very good player. So I think that he deserves to be propped up there in the first round. As you noted, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, all of those guys made at least one play during the college football playoff run. So, I think they did well for themselves to show that they're going to be able to step up in the big moments. But the one that I wanted to talk about was another guy that you mentioned, which is Donovan Jackson. Moving from guard to left tackle, showing his versatility. I think that's incredibly impactful for where he could ultimately project in the NFL. I think there's going to be some teams that consider him as a tackle. And at the very least, he has shown that he's somebody that can play the position in a pinch, which has a lot of value if you're an NFL team trying to constrict your roster to that, 8, 9, 10-man limit.
By the way, quickly, like the Penn State game was the first game I think he moved outside the left tackle. He had some struggles with Abdul Carter. Everyone does. But he got a lot better as the season went on. So I give him credit for going out there and sucking it up and getting better each and every week.
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny because he allowed 2 sacks all season, and they happened to be in that game against Abdul Carter. So
it happens.
It happens to everybody. The best get it from Abdul Carter just like anybody else. But Jackson, I think, is somebody that has really helped himself through the college football playoffs in terms of not only how high he could project, but in terms of his positional versatility as well.
I agree. I have him as a day 2 guy right now, but that's written in oatmeal, as Rick likes to say, because he can certainly move up as we get through this process. Haven't talked a lot about the interior offensive linemen through this draft process. That'll certainly ramp up. Tyler Booker out of Alabama is another young man we'll be talking a lot about as we get through this thing. All right, Debo has a question for you. Over under 3.5 Buckeyes selected in the first round. Is that a rich number? What do you think?
I am actually leaning towards the number. I think it's a very accurate mark because I could make a case for either one. I would say there's not any that are just bona fide first round picks, but there's several that I think could get in there. And then you're talking about Josh Simmons, the injured left tackle who Jackson replaced. You're talking about Donovan Jackson himself, Egbuka, who we've discussed, Tyleik Williams, the interior defensive tackle, who we have not discussed, Tuimoloau, Sawyer. So there's a path there for you to get over 3.5, but I think I would tend to lean towards the under at this point in the process.
Yeah, actually, as I look at the names, I think that's a really good number. I'm going to go over. Josh Simmons, injured ACL, the Oregon game. He has a chance to go, as you mentioned. The 2 edge rushers, the wide receiver, Egbuka, who we've all penciled in going to Pittsburgh for obvious reasons. Tyleik, who you talk about, the defensive tackle. Igbenogson, the cornerback. I think he's coming back. If he doesn't, he'll be perhaps a top 50 guy. So we'll figure that out. I don't think Trevion Henderson gets in. That would be slightly surprising, although I love his game. But that's a good number, Debo, 3.5. I'm going to go over.
I think Simmons may have the best left tackle tape of any prospect that I've seen this year. The issue is that it's very limited. He's now got the ACL injury. He transferred in from San Diego State the prior year. So just not a big enough sample size to really feel comfortable with that first round projection, but somebody that has at least shown that level of talent in a limited capacity.
Yeah, and this class isn't like last year's class where 9 guys went in the first round, so there'll be a demand for guys like Josh Simmons, with the understanding, I suppose, that he won't be ready to go day 1. I mean, he might be healthy enough, but I don't know if you want to throw him out there with the lack of experience that you're talking about. All right, I mentioned Trevion Henderson. Better Buckeye running back, Trevion Henderson or Quinshon Judkins, excuse me, good Lord.
I lean towards Judkins at this point in the process.
Oh, interesting, because I like Trevion.
But they're split by about 15 spots in the overall ranking, so it's very narrow. The stats are very narrow when you look at the 2 of them. Both of them exceeded 1,000 rushing yards. Neither exceeded 1,100 rushing yards. So they're both in a similar category. I think Henderson did show well this year as he's farther removed from his injury. So he has probably closed the gap a little bit, even more than that. But I just love Judkins' size, 6 foot, 219 pounds, has a little bit better size in terms of just being an NFL feature running back. Whereas I think Henderson is listed at 5'10", 208, somewhere in there, which is good size, but you're typically looking around that 220 mark. And I think Judkins, just with his combination of athleticism and size, has gotten a little bit of an edge for me to this point in the process. But ultimately, we've got a lot left to determine where those guys are ultimately going to go.
Yeah, Rick and I talked about this last week, that, and we talked about Trevion specifically, and the comparison with Trevion and Quinshon is sort of like Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. And I think Quinshon's more David Montgomery, and then Jahmyr and Trevion are a little similar. I think Trevion's a 10-9 and change 100 guy, and you see that juice on tape. And I like him for that reason. He's a little shiftier, and Quinshon's more of a bulldozer. I think Trevion's a second-round guy. I wouldn't be surprised if Quinshon lasts till early day 3, not because he's not a good player, but because sometimes those running backs get pushed down. You see a lot of guys get pushed down that you think are perhaps great at higher running back position, but we'll see. We'll see. I was skeptical that when Judkins transferred in, how that was going to work after Rick convinced all those kids to come back to Ohio State, but apparently worked out pretty good. All right. Would Jeremiah Smith, number 4, the freshman wide receiver, be the number 1 overall pick this year, Debo? Not only the number 1, he would be the number 1 wide receiver. I don't want to say by a large margin because I like Tyrone McMillan, but would you take Jeremiah Smith over Travis Hunter? I guess the question is, assuming Travis Hunter's your position player 1.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's a better pure wide receiver than Travis Hunter. And obviously, he's still scratching the surface. Very young player, enrolled early. So not only is he a true freshman, but he enrolled early. So there's a lot of football left for him to play. You're talking about contractual flexibility. You have control over him for potentially more years than you would have for Travis Hunter. So I lean in Jeremiah Smith's direction just because I think he's a better prospect. And then you talk about the age between the two of them. So I would go towards Jeremiah Smith, and I think he would probably be the number 1 overall pick if it were not for Cam Ward. Tennessee sitting there at number 1 overall. You need a quarterback. I think that's probably the direction they will go. The quarterback from Miami. But if it were strictly on a talent basis and Jeremiah Smith was in this draft class, I could make a strong case for him to be the number 1 overall pick.
I'm going to double check, but I think the last year wide receiver went number 1. Yep. 1996. I think that was the last year. Keyshawn Johnson. I think Jeremiah is a little more dynamic than Keyshawn was coming out, but no disrespect to Keyshawn. I think Rick and I talked about this too. We talked about so many things I can't remember, but I think we both agreed that Jeremiah Smith would have been wide receiver 1 in last year's class.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't really considered that. That's actually an even bigger compliment than saying he would be the number 1 wide receiver in this draft class.
In this draft class with no wide receivers.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's pretty high praise, and I haven't sat down to think about it, but I wouldn't immediately push back.
He's a better athlete than Marvin Harrison Jr., I think.
Well, and it's funny because we anointed Marvin Harrison Jr. as, this bona fide number 1 overall pick caliber wide receiver. And then ultimately things changed over the following year. You've got some quarterbacks thrust into the conversation. You've got a couple of other wide receivers that showed themselves very well last fall. So yeah, that's an interesting take. He would certainly be up there. You know what? He probably would have been. He probably would have been the number 1 wide receiver last year.
And I mean, Malik is for real, and Marvin Harrison is for real too. But Malik balled out on a pretty bad team. All right, who's the first Notre Dame player off the board?
I still have to go Benjamin Morrison, the cornerback.
All right, yeah.
Despite his injury, I still think he's the most talented player. I think he's among the best cornerbacks in this draft class.
If it's not him, if we just take him out. What's that?
If it's not him, I think it's got to be Xavier Watts or Howard Cross. But I think because of the injury, I would give Watts a pretty decisive advantage at this point.
Yeah, Watts was going to be first, if not for Benjamin Morrison. And then I like Mitchell Evans. He's coming off the ACL. I thought he had a pretty good season with a quarterback that didn't throw very well. And a lot of times these tight ends get pushed down. So I may like him a little more than what the league does in terms of where he gets drafted. I don't think he gets drafted ahead of Watts unless Watts runs a 6-second 40, and he doesn't play that way, so I don't imagine he will. And then finally, before we take a quick break here, finally get around to Will Howard here. Better pro prospect, Riley Leonard or Will Howard? And I'll just preface it by saying this. I asked a couple weeks ago who gets drafted first, Will Howard or Quinn Ewers, and a scout texted me and said it could be Will Howard. And I don't love Will Howard, but he's big, he's physical, he's not injured, which Quinn struggles with. He's got a pretty big arm. He can play on time. He's not a guy that you want to have to lead the game-winning drive unless he has all these dudes. But he's a guy that can hold down the fort for a game or two. Like, that's where I'm at on Will Howard, like day 3 guy. Maybe gets drafted higher than that, but that's where I sort of have him. Riley Leonard, we've talked about just the shortcomings with the arm strength, not with the legs.
Yeah, I think he's a better passer than Riley Leonard has shown to this point. I think he has better decision making than we've seen from Quinn Ewers to this point. So I think he probably does not have as high of a ceiling, but in terms of a floor and just comfortability, in terms of where he projects in the NFL, I think I would probably lean towards Will Howard in that conversation.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting to watch. He'll be at the Senior Bowl. Riley Leonard will be at the Senior Bowl. I have not heard about what Quinn Ewers' plans are other than he announced for the draft. So we'll sort that out. In the meantime, though, I'm going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to preview some of these Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl players we're excited to see, and we'll talk about that right after this.
I feel home when I see the faces that remember my own. When I'm with my friends, I feel home.
Masters coming in March on CBS. Got some new music. That was interesting. All right. Let's talk about some of these guys. Start with the Shrine Bowl here. Shrine Bowl fires up in a couple days as we record this down in North Texas. And Eric Galco, the director of the Shrine Bowl, we've had on the podcast numerous times, has a bunch of dudes coming and a bunch of dudes that are going to get drafted probably higher than folks expect, just because unless you're a fan of that team, you may not be familiar with them. But let's start with some of your guys here, Josh, for the Shrine Bowl. First up, Isis Waxter, one of the best names in this draft class. And I think my comp for him, let me find it real quick in terms of.
Oh, you got a comp already? Look at that.
If I don't do it, then, our bosses ask for it, and it's a whole thing. So he's 6'2", 215, Villanova, cornerback, plays mostly outside. And my comp for him, and then you can tell us why you got him on your list. Israel Mukuamu out of South Carolina. Remember him?
Yeah.
Big, long corner who plays for Dallas now, I believe. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think he moves pretty well for his size, but ultimately you're drawn to that length that you touched on there. 6'2", 215 pounds, good size to play on the boundary. He's got good play strength. I think he's well coached. Coming out of that Villanova program, they had Christian Benford a couple of years ago who I thought was a really good player and ultimately got drafted. I think Isis Waxter is in a similar conversation. According to True Media, he allowed 157 yards and a single touchdown this past season. So he was not targeted all that often over the course of the season, but I think he, fared very well against the competition this past year. But ultimately, I think you have to like his length. I think you have to like what he does in coverage, his movement skills. He is able to turn and cross the field with relative ease. So there's a lot to like about this player, and I think there's a very good chance that he's drafted. Maybe even on maybe early day 3 is kind of where I would cap it at this point. But a really good player.
I had a middle day 3 for now. We'll see. He's a track guy. Ran track in high school. Ran the 100 hurdle. Ran the triple. Was a triple jump guy. He'll be 24 when the season begins, but no one cares about that. And I thought he played with an edge. He had a really good understanding of what it means to play cover 2 outside and in terms of reading the routes in front of him and playing with physicality. So, yeah, he was a fun guy. And then typical of old Josh Edwards here, took a deep dive on your next guy. Marcus Weir, the guard out of Montana State, 6'2" and change, 295 unofficially. Played right guard last season. Had played right tackle the year before that. And the 2 seasons before that, now that I look at that. So, do I have a comp for him? Oh, I do. How about that? Go ahead, and then I'll give you the comp for Marcus Ware, who played right guard last year for Montana State.
Yeah, I'm not the teacher's pet. Apparently, I don't have a comparison at this point. I'm not an overachiever like Ryan.
Thank you.
But it's that versatility that I was drawn to. It's funny, when I watched him last year, I thought he was a player that looked better inside. At the time, he was playing right tackle. This past year, the Bobcats moved him inside. Does a really good job moving his feet, adjusting his hands when he's engaged with the opponents. Allowed 0 sacks this season. And he only allowed 11 pressures, according to True Media. So I think there's just a really good foundation of what he could be as an offensive lineman. And again, as you're trying to build out your roster at the next level, you like the players that have shown versatility to play multiple positions, and having that flexibility, having played guard and tackle, I think is going to allow him to, to fare well in those interviews with teams over the next couple of months as they ultimately try to parse where he's going to be drafted.
Yeah, he was better as a run blocker than in pass protection. I actually wonder if he might kick inside one more spot and perhaps be a center at the next level, in part because he's only unofficially 295 or whatever. But gives a little more help there in terms of having guards around him and stuff. Gino Gradkowski was my deep dive comp for Marcus Weir. So let's go.
Yeah, he's a little bit more of a limited athlete, which is probably what necessitated the move from right tackle.
Yep.
So I could certainly see him moving inside. He's got to get a little bit more mass on his frame, like you touched on there. But I think he does a really good job in terms of his fundamentals.
All right, let's go to Ole Miss, where Lane Kiffin has the old ball team playing pretty well. When you start looking at this defense, that team should have gone undefeated. They got so many dudes in that defense. I'm going to start with Chris Paul, who will be at the Shrine Bowl. And he's a day 2 guy all day long. How high he goes on day 2 is what's going to be fun. Off-ball linebacker, 6'1", 230 unofficially. And my comp for him was hair on fire Ernest Jones, who I like Ernest a lot. This guy is juiced up. And nickname's Pooh. Always love to find out these guys' nicknames. And he's Arkansas transfer, 21-23 player Arkansas. Great athlete, flies around the field, sideline to sideline range, and he's looking to knock somebody out. He works hard to get off tackles get off blocks between the tackles in the run game, and he is whistle to whistle, and the athleticism is there. At 230, that's typically what you see in today's sort of off-ball linebacker, but he's got some juice, and that is that's why I'm interested to see what happens down here and talk to some folks and see exactly how high he may end up going, because we got some guys in this linebacker class that can play. And I think Chris has an opportunity to separate himself the next week or so. And then once we get to the combine, Josh, I'm going to stay at Ole Miss. And our buddy Lee Douzable texted me about this guy last week. And I was like, who in the world is JJ Pegues? Number 38. I think he wore like 86 or 98 the last game of the season. I love it when the players change numbers and you can't find them. He was 38 for the longest time. And I'm looking at his stats. I don't even know if I have a comp for this guy. He's 6'2", 320. He plays edge rusher. He plays inside. Did you know who JJ Pegues was before we got into this process? Like just casual Saturday watching football?
Yeah. I had been familiar with him, but I hadn't really watched him in terms of a draft prospect until here recently. And, I liked what I saw as well. He's a little bit more sawed off.
Well, let me just say this quickly.
Well.
Like what I didn't know about him, because Lee J sent me a clip of him going to town on Emory Jones, the right tackle for LSU. And the more I watched and looked at the numbers, JJ scored 7 touchdowns this year. He was a quarterback in high school. He may have been a tight end when he arrived at college. He transferred from Auburn. Yeah, he was a converted tight end in the spring of 2021, the spring game or the spring practices. He scored 7 touchdowns this year. He runs a lot of Wildcat, and he's a guy that you don't just put a fat body in there to get in the way. He can run, and he's short yardage guy. He's like a one-man tush push. It's awesome. So he adds that versatility. I don't know if you do that at the next level, but it just shows you how athletic he is. And then you put him on the edge, and he moves like he's 260. And you put him inside. He's not as disruptive inside, but I think he's still sort of learning the position. But, man, I would take him on day 2 all day long because of the juice he plays with.
Yeah, he plays like his hair is on fire. Similar to Pooh Paul, as you touched on earlier. which I thought they were good compliments to what they had on that roster. Walter Nolan is this, highly athletic interior defensive tackle. You've got Princely, Uman on the edge, rushing the passer, highly athletic. Now let's drop in a couple of players that are just going to run sideline to sideline, clean up the plays clean up the chaos that's created by those other two players. I thought it was a really well-constructed defense. And then Jared Ivey, who did you have on your list at some point?
We've talked about him, but I don't think I have I don't know if I've talked about him extensively.
I think he was one of the ones that I was considering as well. And then I saw 2 Ole Miss guys on here, and I was like, man, we gotta make sure people know that we watch more than one team.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's a really fun player. That Ole Miss defense in general was really fun. And for the offseason, an idea to stash away would just be talking about the frustrations that we have as prospect evaluators watching film. You talk about changing jersey numbers. Part of my pet peeve is like camera angles.
Oh, yeah.
The time
FCS
of day,
camera
the
angles,
sun.
yeah.
Nobody's going to listen to it, but we could easily just rant for an hour about those little details when it comes to watching the film.
It's funny because when you watch like the national championship tape compared to like Division II tape, the national championship, I think they bring in the all-stars. Like they bring in the all-star officiating crew, they bring in the all-star, all 22 camera guy. You can sort of get a better sense of what's going on. And look, I would imagine when you're making $8 a game doing the FCS game, you're going to get $8 worth of all 22. So I'm not going to begrudge that person. I just appreciate their hard work. All right. And Kyle McCord, of course, I've talked about him to death. He's my Spencer Rattler of this draft class. He'll be down at the Shrine Bowl, interested in getting a chance to chat with him. And I think if he snuck into the end of round 3, it wouldn't shock me. I'm sure day 3 is more likely right now, but I'll be keeping tabs on him as we get through this process. It's probably a surprise to absolutely no one. All right, I'm going to list your because we got about 15 minutes here. I'm going to list your Senior Bowl prospects, and you can zero in on one of the guys you want to get to. Ozzie Trapillo, Harold Fannin Jr., Ty Robinson, Carson Schlesinger. Fannin Jr., I love out of Bowling Green. Ty Robinson's the defensive lineman from Nebraska. Where's Trapillo go to school again?
Boston College.
BC, and then Schlesinger, to remind me?
UCLA.
Oh, okay. He's the linebacker?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. He's fun. All right, which guy do you want to talk about?
I'm going to touch on Robinson first because he's a player that plays outside. He was a highly regarded recruit out of high school. Good strength. Plays like his hair's on fire. So that's the kind of player that I want to bank on. If I'm, somebody making those decisions at the next level, he's somebody that I'm high on. But I want to talk about Harold Fannin Jr., the lightly discussed tight end from Bowling Green, because we've given Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland their flowers, but Fannin is just this uber athlete at the tight end position, 6'4", 230 pounds, had 117 receptions this year, I believe, for 1,555 yards.
And he had over 150 targets.
Yeah, and it's crazy because you see a MAC tight end and you assume he's doing this against a lower level of competition. But I wanted to isolate 2 games that he had early in the year against Penn State and Texas A&M. Against Penn State, he had 11 receptions for 137 yards and a touchdown. Obviously, Debo survived that, so there's no like ill will, open wounds there. But he did a lot of damage in that game. And then against Texas A&M, I think it was the next game, he had 8 receptions for 145 yards and 1 touchdown. So when you're looking at the all-star environments over the next couple of weeks, you want to see how players at lower levels of competition stack up against the players at Power 4 schools.
Right.
And Fannin has already shown that he is capable of doing that. So he's somebody that I'm excited about. I think a team is going to be very excited to get him, spread him out, put him in the slot, let him kind of do his thing. I think he's somebody that's going to make an impact at the next level.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we talked about him last week as well because to your point, and in fact, I remember mentioning the Penn State and Texas A&M games, where he balled out against the best competition they faced. He's fun. He runs a little funny, but he moves. I was looking at my notes for Carson Schlesinger, the linebacker at UCLA. I love that guy. He feels like a tweener type to me, where you sort of play him. I always compare everyone to Taloa Huafanga in terms of using him in that sort of middle of the field role where he can just blow guys up and run around with the athleticism. Ty Robinson, I love out of Nebraska. Him and Nash Hutmacher, who's going to be the Shrine Bowl, are 2 guys who are a lot of fun to watch on what was a really good Nebraska defense. They had Princewell Umanbiela on that team, who I think has since transferred out of there. He was an edge rusher, Princely's
I
brother.
think he landed at Ole Miss.
Yeah, of course. Why not? Because they need more dudes. But yeah, a ton of good guys, and I'm glad you mentioned Schlesinger and of course Fannin. I tell you what, Fannin may not be talked about a lot. He gets a lot of love on this podcast. We've been sort of leaning into to Harold Fannin, so I'm happy to talk about him. All right, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 names of guys that I'm interested in. Josh Connerly Jr., the left tackle out of Oregon. We've talked about him. He's a great athlete. I just want to see him play more consistently. I don't have him in the first round right now. Maybe that changes. I have him as a day 2 guy because of the athleticism. Just a lot of technique stuff I wanted to see clean up, and, that can happen. Another Ole Miss guy, Trey Amos, the cornerback. If he went in the first round, I would not be totally shocked. Andrew Makuba, the former Clemson transfer who went to Texas at safety, might be one of the smartest kids in this draft, and he will blow you up. He's looking to hit something. I think he had the interception at the end of that Arizona State game in the playoffs that solidified that game for them. By the way, fun fact, Pete Prisco, Arizona State alum, was at that game in Atlanta. He was sitting in Arthur Blank's suite, I believe.
Oh, look at that flex.
Arthur wasn't there, but he said it was pretty swanky.
He just broke in. He's just jiggled some locks and got himself in there.
he sold himself as a security guy. Pete looks like a security guard. And then finally, the guy I want to talk about is Azaria Thomas, the cornerback out of Florida State. Florida State had a forgettable season by just about every measure. Thomas was one of the few, if not the only, bright spot. Long cornerback, plays mostly outside, had an interception, 8 pass breakups. Track guy, 11.45 track guy. And for some perspective, that's a half second slower than Trevion Henderson running the 100, which is pretty funny. And 11.45 is moving. Also a long jump guy. 12 starts this year, only had 1 start the previous year. And in high school, he was a wide receiver and running back. Not surprised. But he can play man. He's incredibly physical at the point. He likes to hit guys. He'll drive on routes in front of him. All the things you're looking for at a sort of a next level cornerback. I had a day 2 grade on him. He'll be at the Senior Bowl, and we'll see how that sorts itself out. But there were very few concerns that I had about the way he played on what was an otherwise hapless bunch of Florida State football week in and week out. My comp for him, I went old school Steelers. If you can tell me where this young man went to college, I'll give you with the first pick high five. Cortez Allen. Steelers day, I think 4th round pick back in 2011. Long corner.
So the school that initially came to mind was UCLA.
No, wrong coast.
No. Cortez Allen.
They signed him to a big deal, and then the wheels just fell off. Like he was really good the first few years, and then sort of got in his own head. Citadel.
Yeah.
You were close.
We could have sat here all day. I never would have came up with that.
You were close. All right.
A couple hundred miles away.
Yeah, just a couple hundred miles away. Doing that Kentucky math. All right. That's it, Josh. We're going to do a little quick HQ segment talking about your latest mock draft. So you can check that out on the YouTube machine. If you're listening to this, it should be up by now. And then we're going to have some podcasts a little more frequently over the next 7 or 8 days. We'll be doing some podcasts from the Shrine Bowl over the weekend. So if you're out there walking the dog, you can check that out. And then we'll be doing podcasts next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from the Senior Bowl with, I believe, Mr. Spielman will grace us with an appearance. And then we'll also be interviewing a ton of players at both the Shrine and the Senior Bowl. So looking forward to that. So Debo and Claire will fashion that into some sort of audio or video situation for people that want to see or hear those things. So a lot to get to. Excited about it. Got to get up at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning. Get my mind right. Josh, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Of course. Always a pleasure.
Episode 214 in the books. Thanks to Josh. Thanks to Debo. Thanks to all you guys who watch, listen, and comment. And we'll see you from the Shrine Bowl.